Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties episode 11. It's our budget special. I know we're doing this a week late, but that's how long it takes us to percolate and read figures and facts. And okay, I'm lying. I was busy at work and didn't actually give a toss.
And I was in another country, so
yeah. Just to be perfectly honest, I think we've done these kind of episodes for 3 years now, and we've just given less and less of a shit about it. So
it gets increasingly depressing every year.
Yeah, which is why this year we brought Satya.
Somebody in to share in the misery.
Yeah, Satya. You know what? I forgot how to pronounce your last name.
Satyajit Marar. We can just call me Satya. It's probably easier for everyone.
Yeah. So he's from the ATA.
The Australian Taxpayers Alliance, for the benefit of those unaware.
That's the one.
Yeah, and aren't you part of some other organisations as well?
Yeah, I'm the director of MyChoice Australia.
That's the one.
So, yeah, pro-consumer choice, for individual liberties, all the good stuff.
Mm.
Basically, big time, leave us the fuck alone, libertarian kind of person, and he's working within the political sphere.
Our kind of libertarian.
So, yeah, and he's working with the political sphere, just putting out those facts and figures, and getting stuff, I guess, to the right people. And obviously, Lee's here as always, and I'm here as well, Vikas, by the way. So that's a long intro.
Yeah.
I want to just.
I was thinking you weren't here because you didn't mention your name, so I was like, who is this other guy?
Yeah. So I suppose we should get right into it. Satya, you've got your I guess you could say budget review done, haven't you? You've got a Cliff Notes version for all of us.
Yeah, sure. So I was locked up in Canberra in the belly of the beast with the budget papers for about 4 hours before they released them to the public. I had enough time to put together a quick media release to let people know, how fucked they are. I can swear on this podcast.
You can. That's
right. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, good. Wouldn't be much of a libertarian podcast otherwise. So essentially, this budget was a bit of a surprise in some ways. Now, every year, the coalition, or, well, really any government, comes up with the same rhetoric. Oh, we have to live within our means, we have to spend wisely, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And they often either don't reflect it or only make a very token effort to. What's different this time is we've seen a so-called right-wing government go so completely far in the other direction and do it in such an admittedly cynical way that I don't think anyone in the public is really buying it, whether they like the budget or not.
Well, the latest news poll had them take a hit in the polls.
Well, to be completely fair to them, it was within the margin of error. So realistically, it probably made things stay about the same as what they were before, which isn't good. But I think the important thing to take away from this is that the government took a big risk and did a very political move, and it hasn't paid off politically. And I think they need to take some notes away from that.
So, Yeah, so what about the big ticket items? I mean, the ones that everybody was talking about were Medicare, NDIS, and education funding, which were the 3 main pillars that they wanted to go out for. Which actually, come to think of it, smacks me of something of a bit of a Labor, budget. Like, these are the things Labor's always talking about, right?
Mm.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, I'll look at the good very quickly because there's so much of the bad. With the education reform, they are doing the right thing, at least in that area. They could probably go a bit further, but I also understand political expediency. You have to start somewhere. I think as a general rule, it's good that people bear a bit more of the cost of their own education. They're the ones who benefit from it. So we're seeing a lowering of the threshold at which you start paying back your HECS debt. We're seeing the interest rate go up, I believe. And ultimately, this is good because we have a lot of people enrolling in university degrees with no real prospects of making a career out of them. They do it because they can. I think a degree should be seen as a financial asset, an investment in your future. And if you don't think that can pay enough dividends that you can pay back your HECS debt, you shouldn't be making that investment. That being said, I think it's going to be quite unpopular amongst many university students, as I imagine. So it'll be interesting to see if the government can get this through the Senate.
Sorry, I was just agreeing with you.
With the other 2 things, so now what's interesting about this Medicare levy? So the Medicare levy is basically an income tax. Only people who earn an income pay for it. It's sitting at 2% right now, and it's going to move up to 2.5%. The government in the budget papers kept saying, using this figure of, it's only a 0.5 point increase, to cover up the fact that it's 25% more than what you paid previously. That's a quarter.
I was actually going to say, I have some statistics on that because I'm looking at the budget paper right now. It's expected to make $400 million in what's left of this financial year, $3.5 billion in the next year after that, and $4.2 billion in the year 2021.
That's a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the interesting thing about this Medicare levy is that it's sort of a replacement for the GP co-payment, which they proposed in 2014. And as you remember, Joe Hockey had the political salesmanship of a Saudi diplomat at a women's rights conference. He was terrible. He went on radio insulting people who drove cars. I mean, he just, shambles.
It's okay, man. Poor people don't drive cars. You don't have to worry about it there.
Yeah. But here's the thing. So at the time, Hockey had proposed the co-payment, and the idea was that the co-payment would fund this medical research future fund, which is a $14 billion slush fund for the government to speculate on medical research, which is really a private sector activity. Big Pharma has plenty of dollars floating around in that area. And what's funny is the co-payment never went through, but the fund went through. And the government has since gone completely quiet about it. No plans to cut it, nothing. That's $14 billion, which will completely fund the NDIS, no problems. But they don't want to touch it for some reason. They'd rather slug people with another tax, which I think is just bullshit.
I think whenever we do these episodes, I need to keep sharp objects off my desk, because I just feel every time anybody starts talking about just the nonsense, I just feel the urge to stick something sharp in somewhere in my face, because it's just, it's a bit like,
You can get on the NDIS.
It's just a face pump. Yeah, you can go on the NDIS if you do that too. Yeah, like Satya said.
Yeah,
that's it. I mean, and we should since we're talking about income taxes, we should probably point out that I haven't quite double checked, but I'm willing to bet my bottom dollar the temporary budget levy is still about. Is that the case?
So the answer, well, since I'm paying it, I can tell you it's definitely still about. So, subtle humble brag about my income there, but there is nothing more permanent than a temporary tax.
I know it's hilarious.
I can't imagine it ever being dropped.
No. So there's 1.5%, 2%. It was 2%, wasn't it?
I believe it's 2%.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to sit there and calculate it. It's a large.
No, it's 2%. I'm trying to think back to. Because we're doing taxation at the moment at uni, and it's 2%. So, thanks, guys. Thanks, Liberals, for a 2% income tax increase, and now Medicare levy on top of it.
Hang on. I want to talk about my favorite part of the budget every year, which is the black money group. Sorry, hang on. I had it here for a second. So every year, the government promises to crack down on black money, and they come up with some unrealistic figure. Last year, it was $441 million. This year, it's $600 and something million. But the point is, it never reaches it, and quite frankly, it's always used on the budget. And I like to raise it because I found it hilarious the first time I saw it.
How much did they actually collect last year, Vikas?
About 81 million.
Oh, okay. So we're expecting they'll probably get about 120 million this coming year.
Probably. The point is they're getting more black money, but I'm not sure if it's adjusted for CPI.
Why don't they just say actually, $1 trillion?
Satya, you can probably tell us more on that.
Well, I don't know a lot about the black money thing. I do know that they always use this rhetoric of closing the corporate loopholes. Somehow we have all these evil companies that pay absolutely no tax, and they're really evil, and they have to be punished somehow. And usually that's bullshit. But what's interesting is every year the government dips a little more deeper into people's pockets using a very simple phenomena called bracket creep, which I'm sure you guys. Yeah. So basically,
for the benefit of those at home, why don't you explain what bracket creep is?
Yeah. So basically, what it means is that every year wages get adjusted due to inflation. So you're not actually able to buy more; you're just making more paper money. And that sometimes pushes people, shoves them into a new income tax bracket, which allows the government to claim more money. The logical thing to do, or the moral thing, would be to index the income tax brackets at least the same way you do the wages. The problem is the government won't do that because this is the easiest way for them to do a revenue grab while keeping completely silent about it. And it's one of the things that we're fighting for at the ATA, but, remains to be seen.
Is there anyone, are you aware of anybody in the world who does who indexes brackets? Because it seems to me that every country does this same thing of income tax bracket creep.
Yeah, what's funny is, even in a country like Australia that usually tries to follow the rest of the world, we're seeing more and more little revolutionary ideas that we're willing to look at. We wanted to do the carbon tax before a bunch of other countries. We wanted to do this tax on online shopping. When it comes to that sort of crap, no problem. We're world leaders. It's time for us to lead the way. But when it comes to something like this, which is so fundamentally fair and which could actually have other countries do a domino effect, governments are just, not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
I'm trying to actually find this bracket creep figure, but I'm not finding it in here. Is it accounted for? Is it somewhere in the budget?
It was in the revenue statement. They did have a few figures buried in there, but what they usually do is they don't make a highlight of it.
Big shock horror.
On the issue, by the way, of buried figures, I believe it was budget paper 1. On one of the footnotes, very cheekily hidden away, is the disclosure that the debt ceiling is going to be lifted to $600 billion. That's a pretty big deal. Especially considering the amount of rhetoric the government has been throwing around about limiting public debt. And especially considering, issues like credit rating if we aren't careful. So the devil is always in the details with these things.
Well, actually, speaking of details, I was mentioning earlier that the price of visas is expected to go up, and they're expecting to make $54 million of visas. Sorry, no, I take that back. So indexation of visa application charges, it's expected to make $35 million this year, $70 million next year, $125 million 1920, and 2021 is expected to make $180 million. So basically slugging the foreigners with the tax. And it looks like there's a lot of stuff where they're basically going after foreign investors, which might actually impact the ability of Australia to get credit in the near future.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The thing is, foreigners ultimately can't vote. So they really don't serve much of a purpose for the government unless they're doing something for local people. And they're also the easiest boogeymen to identify. They're probably second only to the banks in that respect, which is why you've seen this bank levy come in as well. Now, what's interesting about the skilled migration changes, so, we saw the skilled occupations list reduced considerably. We saw an abolishing of 457 visas. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's all based upon market conditions, what professions are in demand and what aren't. And I think this was a long time coming. The problem that I have is they're replacing it with this new system. And it would take the critical skills shortage visas. So, for example, let's say that you're opening up an ethnic restaurant and there's no one that makes that special kind of recipe that you want. So you bring in a chef from a small village somewhere in the other side of the world, and he comes in, he trains your staff, and he makes the food. They're now going to slug companies that do that. These are a lot of small businesses, by the way. They're going to slug them with something like $2,000 or $3,000 a year per worker.
It's $5,000.
Yeah, $5,000. Yep. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, up to $5,000.
Yeah, up to $5,000 a year per worker, which is absolutely ridiculous. Again, it's a tax grab, and it's something that even the media is not really making an issue of, because, well, I guess they assume foreigners don't really read the Australian media. What they want...
It's also that the foreigners don't get to vote.
Well, right? But the business owners that hire the foreigners do get to vote.
Yeah,
so they're the ones who are paying the cost of it. It's not the people with the visas who pay this. It's the
they do, but at the same time, the argument that's being made, and I hear this all the time, despite the fact that what he described is perfectly reasonable, I can't tell you how many times I hear why the hell do we need cooks? Anyone can cook, or why do we need hairdressers, right? And I sit there going firstly, it's probably like an ethnic shop somewhere that needs a particular type of person that does a particular type of thing, right? And you won't find that person there. Secondly, there's literally no such thing as skilled and unskilled labor anymore. And the reason for that is labor unions have created a massive occupational licensing scheme system that has effectively made all labor skilled labor, right? So it doesn't matter anymore. Yes, a hairdresser is just as much skilled labor as a doctor is. Unfortunately, that's what labor unions have done, but it's what our country looks like now.
Yeah, I remember back in 2007 when you read all these ethnic local community magazines, and there'd be all these advertisements for tertiary education for all these obscure colleges that no one has ever heard of, and they kept advertising hairdressing courses, and it made me think, wait, why do so many people want to be hairdressers? And then, well, it's pretty obvious. If you want to move to Australia, it was the easiest way to do it. Of course, they've now closed most of those loopholes. But yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. No, sorry.
I was going to say another way that they're going to slug foreigners is for leaving homeowners who own their property, foreign homeowners, leaving their homes vacant. They're going to get taxed. According to the thing, it's where a foreign-owned residential property is left vacant for more than 6 months in a year, a charge will be levied on the foreign owner, equivalent to the foreign investment application fee, which was paid at the time of application. So
that's hilarious. So let me get this straight: a foreign investor's taking the hit because their home is not currently housing someone, right? And the government's going to tax that.
Yep.
Does that sound retarded to anyone else?
Yeah, especially since it's quite easy to imagine a situation where somebody would have a home that's empty for 6 months of the year. Like, if you spend half the year in China and half the year in Australia, or it just, well, yeah, that's going to happen, So you might be a multi-million-dollar investor.
No, so this targets investors, right? So it's not someone who's like living in their place, right? This is targeting someone who's got like an apartment or something, and that apartment's not filled for 6 months. So I can very easily imagine, like, if you've got an apartment that's not up to code or something like that, right? And you're going to spend about 6 months to repair all of it, right? And in that entire time, you could be slugged with this tax, just for shits and giggles. I mean, yeah, there's like Satya said. Foreigners are just easy pickings for the government, and right now they're just finding new ways to hit them.
Yeah, and with what Lee said, you could very easily be a businessman, someone who is actually bringing a lot of value to the country, and you're a foreign national, you spend half your year overseas, and suddenly you get hit with this thing for nothing. What's interesting is I read an article, I forgot where I read it, but it was claiming that when we talk about foreign investors, a lot of them, something like half almost, are actually temporary residents or people who actually intend to invest a long-term chunk of their future in Australia. They're not just, people with Chinese black money who want a place to chuck it away, like what they'd have you believe. So the government, I guess, should have really thought about how this would play out in practice, and I guess we'll see. We'll find out.
And the absurdity is you can be a resident for tax purposes. So you could be paying income tax on everything you're earning overseas, because one of the criteria they judge to measure whether you're a resident for tax purposes in Australia is if you own a home. So if you're here 6 months a year and you're significantly involved in activities in Australia, you could be paying income tax on all your income, and then on top of that they're going to slug you for this stupid vacancy rule. Like, it's just absurdity.
So the interesting thing for me is how this actually might. So, like, it looks like they're going after foreign credit. It looks after they're going foreign investors. The thing is, everything appears to be like targeted towards any part of our economy that's currently growing. So it really is. It's targeted towards any part of the economy that's growing. And from a government sense, that makes perfect sense, right? From a government perspective, it makes perfect sense because you want to target the bits where you can try and get money from. The question I have is, I mean, what are we at? We're at 2% growth, aren't we? Satya, you've probably got a better idea of this than I do.
Yeah, it's above 2%. The government is saying that it'll go up to 3%, and they're assuming it'll stay at 3% for a while.
Yeah, I don't think so. They're hitting the growth parts of the economy
Yeah.
Right. So I'm sitting here
Yeah.
going like, yeah, that's very optimistic that you think your tax will have no effect. I'd like to buy that magic pie, but I don't think that's going to happen. And right now, a large part of our growth is currently being driven because the mining sector's, winding down. It's being driven by effectively our what do they call financial institutions, and they're the ones that are being slugged with this tax. And simultaneously, like that's not a bad thing to slug the financial sector with the tax necessarily, right? Because businesses can then obviously opt around to get cheap credit from elsewhere. But they're also going for the foreign direct investor. So I'm sitting there going like, you're taxing the money that's coming in and you're taxing the money that's already here. What are they planning to do? Slow the financial sector down to the point where it's as slow as everything else? In which case, what's your growth plan?
Well, no, there's one aspect of the Australian economy that's booming, and that's the welfare state. That's doing cracking business. They're getting plenty more money. So,
welfare industrial complex.
Yeah, I mean, one of the few things I agree with Ronald Reagan is his comment on, the government's view of the economy should be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. And that's basically how this is playing out. You can
I like to call that subsidies for supplicants.
You can only tax what's actually creating value, what's actually creating an income. So of course they go for the stuff that's generating an income. I mean, I've seen an article that talked about, one of the problems with the banking sector is that it's cozy government backing and all the rest of it. So there is an argument to say, well, the banks are getting profit, essentially monopoly rents. Fair enough. The way you stop that is by deregulating the banking sector and getting them out of the pocket of government and getting them away from government guarantees and all the rest of it, or at least charging them a rate based on those guarantees. It's not a reason to go for bank liabilities for some reason. This bank levy just seems to be kind of weird.
So my favourite thing about Budget Night was Anna Bligh, former Labor Premier from Queensland, saying, so she was representing the banks and saying taxing the banks will just be passed straight on to the customer. And she's right. It will. It'll be passed. But the thing is, it'll be passed on to home loan people.
Yes.
People who are on home loans, because they're the ones who are the most immobile. They have a lot of debt to carry, and just slugging them with another, fee is really nothing in the long term of things.
Yeah. What's funny though is that Turnbull admitted this. He said, "Yeah, there's nothing I can do to stop the banks from passing this on." But then he makes
at least he's not completely delusional.
There's this bizarrely libertarian-sounding argument where he says, "Oh, but this affects the 5 banks. There's still these other banks there, and the free market will sort it out. They won't have anything to pass on. Customers can just switch." Well, if you already have a home loan with ANZ or Westpac, you can't just jump to Rabo Bank. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And also,
you've got to pay the fine, sorry, not the fine, the break
early
lease.
Fees.
Sorry, early exit fees, and those are massive, and trust me, those are going to go up.
Oh yeah.
And the other thing is essentially what you're doing is you're making so smaller banks are typically more expensive. They can't loan out at the same kinds of rates that the big banks can because they just don't have the same access to credit. So essentially, you're penalising people who have found cheaper loans and then forcing them to go into maybe
more expensive loans,
but more expensive loans elsewhere, but maybe not as expensive as the big banks. Like it's just. I mean, we were talking about this beforehand, Vikas, weren't we? About it's not really a good outcome when the government makes something really expensive, and then your next best alternative is something else that's really expensive that the government's also made really expensive. That's not that's not an improvement. That's just it's slightly less shit.
Exactly.
It's homeopathic legislation.
Yeah.
It's this whole level playing field argument where they say, and the government has actually used this phrase, they're fostering competition by creating a level playing field. Right? So if Usain Bolt is sprinting against a paraplegic, the only logical thing to foster competition is to break his legs. Yeah. Then you have a level playing field. 2 people are competing. It's great.
Yeah.
Isn't that what the capitalists want? It's bullshit.
Yeah. But the interesting thing there is it's basically making the argument that things are not as cheap as the government would like, right?
Yeah.
And therefore things need to be made more expensive. That's the underlying sort of phrase. Sorry, that is the underlying sort of approach of this government, which is interesting to say because they're meant to be the party of small government. They're meant to be the party of lower costs of living and all of that stuff. But they've picked a very chiefly-esque policy platform so far, right? And the funny thing is, so Helen Dale made a tweet about this. The next election looks like it's going to be between Chiefley's Labour Party and Arthur Caldwell's Labour Party. So with Bill Shorten clearly representing a reinvigorated Arthur Caldwell with that amazing ad they put out last week.
Yeah. So to you two that you weren't represented in the White Australia that we saw in Bill Shorten's ad.
You know what? Honestly, I'm actually glad that there weren't any ethnic people because that ad was so bloody cheesy. The worst thing with ethnic.
I was actually, I'm actually with Satya on this one. Like, I would have just facepalmed if there was an Indian in there, just going, "Oh God,
you would have been.
What are you doing, brother?"
Should we talk about Gonski and NDIS? Yeah. So NDIS it's according to the government, it's fully funded, whatever that means. Presuming
Which is funny.
Yeah.
So I mean, Labor swore that it was fully funded, but I remember having this discussion in 2013, going like, I don't see where they funded it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not there in a budget line item. It looks like they just passed the bill. Satya, you might be able to shed light on this.
Yeah, this is why. I mean, this is the whole reason why they're bringing up that Medicare levy. It's entirely to pay for the NDIS, and which is really a bungle because this hasn't even been mentioned as a proposal until the day of the budget. What's interesting is when you compare this government to John Howard, he brought in the GST, and whatever your opinion on the GST, he started a conversation over many years about why that was necessary. He tried to bring everyone on side before he pushed it. But now you have a government that is just deciding, okay, when can I sneakily, put this on the door and get away with it, which is what they're doing. And I think the reason why they're doing it like that is because it's actually the best way to sell the policy to the people once you've already passed it through. So you had Scott Morrison saying, the disabled people have it really difficult. It's our responsibility to care for all of them. You could be disabled, and he's using that rationale to then say, okay, therefore, pay a higher Medicare levy.
Yeah.
It's politics of guilt.
So I think Kevin Rudd might have begun that trend, because yes, the Liberal Party under Howard was big about doing these big sort of campaigns where they would like really, really try and sell the policy for years and years and years before they actually went through with it. And that way there was enough consensus. Like, selling Telstra, right? There was this massive election campaign in 2001, like, oh, John Howard's going to sell Telstra, right? I mean, he went to the election saying he's going to sell Telstra. Can you imagine, Malcolm Turnbull going into the next election going, I'm going to sell the NBN? Never in a million years.
No.
So I get where you're coming from, and I think what's happened is Kevin Rudd sort of changed that, where he came in saying, I'm going to be an economic conservative, right? I'm going to be just as fiscally responsible as John Howard.
Not a sliver of light between them.
Yeah, and then just started spending away like crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and not just that, but then there was the entire carbon tax debacle where it's just like, I will not pass, there will be no carbon tax under a government I lead. And then all of a sudden there was, and, the thing is, the cynicism in politics has shot up. And as a result of that, you have politicians behaving in ways that they wouldn't have behaved in 15 years ago. And I think the incentive structure, because of the way we vote in party lines, is there so that it don't actually get punished for that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the cynicism has led to a lot of politicians losing their mandate completely. So, for example, you had Tony Abbott. His problems began because he ran on a campaign promise of no cuts to healthcare, no cuts to SPS or ABC. Now, those things needed to be cut, and he should have very honestly have just said, yeah, I'm probably going to cut these, or not, or at least not have spoken about it, not have made a promise and then withdrawn it later on, because that's what started the snowball effect that ultimately led to his unpopularity. Similarly, Malcolm, who now apparently has a lesser popularity rating than Abbott does, when he, some would use the word knifed Abbott, he did that on the mandate that Abbott is a guy who cannot sell these policies. I'm charismatic, I'm charming, I can convince the voters that the tough things need to be done. And the reason why people have turned on him so completely isn't because he's no longer... Exactly. He's failed the very basic thing that was the justification for him taking Abbott's role. And everyone knows it. And no one can take him seriously anymore. He's got this look of pain and exasperation in his eyes. And it's there permanently.
Yeah.
It wasn't there during the Oscar fiasco years ago. What happened since then?
I just want to sit Malcolm down and go, like, you need to pick a position, any position, right? And you need to try and sell that position, because he hasn't. I'm sitting there going, like, he backed away from gay marriage. That was the really, really funny one. I'm sitting there going, like, his electorate is basically all about that shit, right? And he's walked away from that. The budget repair, totally walked away from that as well, right? NBN, more or less, it's less of a clusterfuck than what he left it. Than what he was given. Just more or less, like, he's coasting, right? And people don't like governments that are coasting, right? It's just like coasting represents no change, and everybody has something in government that they need to be changed. And unfortunately, that means he's going to be the guy who will more than likely lose the election, barring Bill Shorten going full Corbynite.
Which is unlikely.
Yeah, I think the thing is, Shorten is cut from the same cloth in terms of not really standing for anything and just saying whatever is politically expedient. And I think another problem...
Rudd and Gillard were the same. I mean, it's basically been the case since John Howard left.
Yeah, as much as I dislike some things about John Howard, the one thing is he was a guy who actually said what he believed.
Well, and he
went through with it, despite the fact that I disagreed with it.
Yeah, and he actually was defeated on the basis of a policy that was actually a substantial policy, which was work choices. Like, whether people, I mean, I'm sure we're probably all in agreement that it's a pretty good policy, or had a lot of merit to it. But even if you hated it, at least it was a substantial policy. It was a real thing. It was
something you could point to.
Yeah, which is exactly why he got defeated, because you can point to it. None of this stuff you can point to. It's all empty and.
This is actually a slightly different debate, and it's something that I hope continues on in the comment section here of this video. Australians don't like that, and I think they have substantial. I think that the defeat of John Hewson in 1993, right, with Fight Back, right, which was coined as the longest suicide note in history, right, and then you had John Howard defeated on a substantial policy of work choices, right, which was first of all liberal mantra for years and years and years, right. The fact that you had these two instances where policies you could point to actually failed, kind of set events into motion, where you've now got a heavy incentive structure in place in politics to be cynical, to say whatever it is that gets you elected, and basically achieve nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't... I mean, there was a lot in between Fight Back and 07. There was a lot of policy that Howard put forward that was substantial. And, going to the election with the GST as a thing was, So, yeah, I'm not quite sure about that. I mean, in some ways, Howard was continuing on from the policies of Labor. So there was sort of this 20-year period where you had...
massive economic deregulation.
Yeah. I mean, there's a fair bit of overlap. I mean, essentially, Kevin Rudd was a populist, more or less. He didn't believe anything. Julia Gillard was just the carrying on of that populism and didn't believe anything. And
Abbott is a continuation.
Yeah. So I mean, really, it's like I think.
And then you've got Malcolm now, who's exactly the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And
although I wouldn't really call Malcolm popular.
Really, what happened with Labor was kind of, the background to that was you had Fraser, who didn't really believe in anything either. Which was a reaction to Whitlam, who really did kind of believe stuff. And then, 15 years of liberal rule before that. So it's
28 years of liberal.
Was it 28? Yeah. I thought it was... Oh, yeah, because it was... Menzies was 15 years, but the rest...
Sorry, 22.
Yeah, sorry, 22, yeah. I thought it was like 20 years, but I couldn't remember. I mean, I guess I can't really name the policies of Menzies, but I know he wrote a speech that everybody likes to quote, but...
Actually, so someone actually did tell me that the party of Menzies died with the last budget, and I have to strongly disagree. So what is now called HEX originally began under Menzies. In fact, Kate Blanchett was educated, despite the fact that she says, it was all because of Gough Whitlam. It was actually because of Robert Menzies.
Yep.
So Robert Menzies started off what eventually then went on to become the Commonwealth Assisted Grant Scheme, or whatever it was called. So the original idea for free tertiary education came from Robert Menzies. Also the pension, believe it or not, came under a Menzies government. So there was this... A lot of the welfare state came into place under Menzies, very much to the disappointment of Holt, but obviously Holt, vanished.
Yeah. Well.
No. I'm kidding. No, I'm rewriting the history
communists got him.
Yeah. Sorry, Satya. Yeah.
No, good. You mentioned with the sort of populist stuff, the school funding thing. So the $18.6 billion that's being committed. This is actually one of my pet peeves. So one of the reasons why I ended up becoming a liberal or even right-wing in the first place was I went to a public school, and we were constantly having, Labour propaganda shoved down our throats. And, that would not have been so bad, except for how far it went. So, we got a grant from the Education Revolution Fund. And all of a sudden, you had all these year 8 kids, I was in year 9, with free laptops. I'm sure some of them put them to good use. Most people jailbroke them and used them to play Counter-Strike or watch pornography. So there was a lot of that happening. At the same time, we built a fence around the school we didn't need because the government forced us to spend money. We spent higher than the market rate. And all that happened was I could no longer go get pizza during my free period. So, that's obviously an anecdote. But ultimately, we have this mentality of let's fix education by shoving more money at it. And, education isn't a strip club. You can't just throw money at it and, make it work. You have to really know where that money is going. You have to have a concrete plan with outcomes and so on. And we don't really have that. It's funny because we've had successful governments increase per student funding. We now have one of the highest, even without Gonski, one of the highest per student funding rates in the OECD, which is a lot of developed countries. And yet we're lagging behind Kazakhstan and all these other random countries in mathematics and numeracy and stuff.
Yeah, so this is the same problem the United States has. The United States, for anyone who's wondering, spends the most per student in the world, right? And nobody says the US secondary education system is the best in the world. And it's...
And often the state spending per pupil is highest in areas with the poorest outcomes, like Washington, D.C. I'm pretty sure per capita they have the highest amount of spending on government
actually
funding.
It's California, but
it's
California. Yeah, DC's the highest because it's got private schools.
Right.
So so when you include that, yes, it's the highest.
Okay.
No, but yeah, I remember the Waiting for Superman, which covered all of this, right? And they're just like, we are spending more and more on students. And if you take a look at it, Australia's going down the same path, but it's basically it's expenditure in, like, for example, fences and all these buildings that basically turn schools more into like prisons. I was just going to say, as Satya said that, they basically turned his school into a prison, right?
Yep.
Which it effectively was for you, wasn't it, for 6 hours a day?
Yeah. I mean, the free period was a respite, but you put a fence around the school, it no longer is.
There you go. Yeah. So if you take a look at it, we really need to start looking at what Finland does, which is a lot more broken down control. So they teachers there are hired at a local level, right? And it's just there's a lot about the conservative view of education that's in place in Finland, and there's a lot about the left-wing view of giving more having higher teacher quality being in there. Now, what's missing from that is the bureaucratic element, right? And that's something US, UK, Canada, Australia, basically most of the OECD has in spades. And if you take a look at it, our administration expenditure is far outpacing any other expenditure within the education system. And I think that that's realistically what we're paying for, and we need to start asking, how much administration do we actually need?
Yeah, and what's interesting is Finland, I don't know a lot about it. I know you just mentioned that it's not as bureaucratic as we are. They actually are able to pay their teachers probably one of the highest real wages for teachers in the world. And I think a part of the reason why they're able to do that and attract the best people, I remember reading somewhere that apparently you need a PhD or something to teach high school level.
Masters.
Yeah, masters teach high school level. And they're able to do that because the money is being spent wisely. The resources are being allocated well, not chucked into a bureaucratic machine that serves itself.
Well, also, the interesting thing is, even though there's teachers' unions there, so I found it interesting, the teachers' union, so this was all covered in Waiting for Superman, by the way, and if you have the chance, go out and watch it. It's actually quite brilliant. It covers the Finnish system in quite good detail. So even though they have teachers' unions, the teachers' union doesn't control the salary, right, which is weird. So the salaries are controlled by individuals, but what they take care of is the teachers' conditions, right? And that's something, if you told the Teachers' Federation here in Australia, they'd be sitting there going like, what are you talking about? Of course we have to control the income of our teachers. We've got to make sure they get paid right. And that kind of mentality, unfortunately, stops you from rewarding the really good teachers or trying to attract better ones.
Yeah, I remember I had an argument with my high school teacher when I was in high school, saying, "Oh, why are you against unions? I rely on my union." And I said to her, "Look, because of unions, a good teacher like you makes the same amount of money as a crap teacher."
Yep.
And that to me is unfair. I don't think that's right. I think you should make twice what he makes, and he should make half what he makes.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, unfortunately convincing. I mean, my wife's a teacher, and I use that argument, and I say to her, because she is a good teacher, like her students love her, the parents of her students love her. She has lots of great connections with the kids that she works with, and she just doesn't seem to, there's just an imperviousness to it. Like, I think teachers themselves have bought into all of this stuff. They don't, I mean, really, I can't imagine there's been a situation, it's been a very long time since actual profit motive has actually been a part of what teachers can aspire to. Like actually saying, well, I'm going to make more money than my peers. It's just not a possibility. So teachers don't even buy into that possibility. But if you become an engineer or a lawyer, you can say, I'm going to aspire to become a partner, or I can aspire to be, this or that or the other. So
it's the chief engineer for the engineers, by the way.
Sure, whatever.
Or the head design authority. Just saying.
Whatever, I don't care. You've got a career path where you have control over where you're going to an extent and what you want to aim for, and you have real flexibility. There's lots of variety in work. You become a teacher, you basically get slotted into the sausage machine. You get paid at the same rate. There is senior teacher positions, but you essentially have to get a postgrad degree, and everybody gets a postgrad degree gets that pay. So it's not even if you put in the extra work, it's not like the school is opting to pay you more. It's just, here's the bureaucratic system. You slot in. Okay, there's your place. Boom. That's what you get paid. That's how your life is to be. So it's we need Uber for teachers. You need a way of breaking down the situation as it is, so people can see there's an alternative. But that's kind of challenging.
Yeah, and I just thought of, so the whole rhetoric of Gonski, which is a labor rhetoric, but it's been opted by the coalition, of course. It's this idea of needs-based funding. So this very emotive message of, the students with the worst grades who live in worse places are the ones who need the money. Why are we giving, close to equal amounts of money or subsidy to private schools, public schools, for example, or good schools or bad schools?
They did this in... Sorry. Finish up, yeah?
Sure. And the problem with that is you're basically... I mean, if you regard funding as a reward, you're rewarding bad outcomes.
No, you're rewarding mediocrity.
Saying, don't get too good, because then we lose our funding in the future sometime.
So, in case anyone's wondering about this, so I just remembered the entire premise of Gonski has actually been tried before in New South Wales. If you look it up, it's called the Vinson Report, if I remember correctly. And the interesting thing about that one was, and I remember having this debate on Facebook a while ago. The Vinson Report clearly stated that doing this funding on the margins took average. There was an incentive structure put into place for the principals at these schools that were, doing all right, but not bad, right? Not good, but not bad. There was an incentive structure in place for them to start taking on problem cases and actually drag their school down.
Well, it's like the AFL. It's like, there's always accusations of teams tanking. If you're down near the bottom of the ladder, if you're at the bottom, you're going to get all these draft picks at the start of the next season. You're going to get all these benefits. So if you're on the bottom, you don't want to start winning. You're not going to, because there's no reward for being third bottom. There's only a reward for being first and second bottom. So, if you're on that verge of being pushed up, well then, maybe your players will take it a bit easy.
Just cool down, yeah.
You'll send out the new guys, keep your star players back, because you don't want to get up to don't want to do it too well.
Yeah, or if there's someone who would be making less money if they were working than if they were on youth allowance or something.
That's it.
Why wouldn't they go on youth allowance? It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, welfare traps are one that most people don't have a very good grasp of, and yet it's, marginal rates of tax when, you're earning a certain amount, you've got a certain amount of welfare, and then you earn that little bit more, and then all of a sudden, bam, you're hit with a massive reduction in all of your benefits and in your, all the different things you get. Why would you then start working? You'll make more money if you don't work. So you don't work.
So anyone who's watching this for the first time, look up the Vinson Report, look up the concept of welfare traps. I mean, these aren't relatively new concepts. They're just observed and frequently ignored by policymakers. Well, not policymakers, they're ignored by politicians who have the memory of goldfish, effectively. In fact, actually...
Not even that. It's just their incentives to care are just not there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Straight up
ignorant. Well, that's actually... But what I'm amazed about is, because these debates occur on Facebook all the time, and you see people... This is the thing. Please have proper debates on Facebook where you're, actually sourcing material with each other, because I didn't even know about the Vinson Report until, a teacher posted it to me.
Right, okay.
Right? And interestingly enough, she posted it to back up why Gonski was needed. And as I read it, right, I found out all these, little things in there. Did you know that it forced, that they built computer labs in Redfern that would just keep getting robbed, right? And that was a significant cost in the Vinson Report. I'm sitting there and going, I learned this from someone who thought that this report proved Gonski, right? And now I have this little thing in my arsenal which I can always talk about. But seriously, get out there and actually have these debates with people, and you'll be surprised by what you learn from people.
All right, well, maybe at that point we should wrap it up. We've been going for 50 minutes. It's probably the longest episode. Oh, no, we've done an hour episode, but pretty long episode for our standards.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks, Satya, for joining us. That was great having you on. And maybe if we just spruik the kinds of things that you're doing at MyChoice and ATA at the moment. Is there anything coming down the pipeline that people might be excited by? And where can they find out more if they want to learn more about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, like us on Facebook, Australian Taxpayers Alliance and MyChoice Australia. You can also like my page, Satya Marar-writer, where all my articles go up. With MyChoice, our biggest campaign at the moment is tobacco harm reduction. We're trying to legalize nicotine solutions for vaping, which is a proven quit smoking tool. The government doesn't like this because, one, it looks cool, and two, they can't tax smoking. Yeah, and they can't tax the way they tax tobacco. So we're trying to work out a legislative solution. We have a form for contacting your MP to make that happen. So definitely get on board and support us on that.
Excellent.
Cool.
All right. Well,
feel free to come on anytime, mate.
No worries, man. Cheers. It's been fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that leaves it for this week. We'll be back again next week.
And subscribe.
Yeah.
And all of that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Which we never keep talking about. Okay. See everyone next week.
Thanks.
Yep.
Sweet.